Roman discipline is very strict from the beginning. And it's one of the striking things when you have this citizen army of these people who volunteer and go as part-time soldiers, they pretty much lose all the legal rights they've got, the substantial ones as a citizen, as a civilian, when they're in the army. So you can be beaten to death for stealing from a comrade, falling asleep on guard, this sort of thing. Because again, but it's this idea that you're all part of the same entity, you're led by people you've elected, so therefore for a while you suspend your rights because this is what the Republic requires. And that tradition of tight discipline comes on. Now, decimation is one of those things that, first of all, you need to make clear, and it's something that bugs me every time a journalist misuses this, which they do so often. Decimation means executing 1 in 10, not executing 90% and leaving one alive. So when they talk about this force was decimated, this army was decimated, well, 10% loss is bad, but it's not crippling as a rule. And it was not imposed very often. There are a few cases, it's seen as sort of traditional, old-fashioned, tough discipline, the sort of men we used to be, maybe we're not anymore. The Romans, like a lot of people in the ancient world, have this basically pessimistic view of the future, that everything's getting slowly worse, and that we used to be far better, but we're now rich and corrupt and soft, and we're not the sort of those grim faces you see on some of the tombstones, or ancestors sort of glaring at you that were rigorous and wore hair shirts all the time and never did anything wrong. So there is a bit of that in it. It does happen. One of the notable cases is Crassus does this in the slave war against Spartacus. When the gladiators have rebelled and lots of slaves and a unit breaks, part of that unit is decimated. So that, as I say, again, that means 1 in 10 is executed, normally beaten to death by the other 9. And then the rest are given a symbolic punishment. They're supposed to camp outside the rampart and be fed barley instead of wheat. Barley is what you give to the dirt poor or to slaves or to animals. So you get that instead until you've redeemed yourself. There's another case. Mark Antony does it to some units that ran away in his campaign in sort of Armenia and beyond into Medea, that area in the east. Happens to a unit under the Emperor Tiberius in the 1st century, but they're so unusual that they are things people talk about. So it's probably pretty rare, and we get hints that actually the army can't afford to be as strict as it might like to be because you're just going to run out of soldiers later on. So we hear, for instance, of a commander in the 1st century under Nero who is especially strict because he executes deserters the first time they run away and get caught. Whereas clearly normally they're sort of thought, okay, slap on the wrist, come back, don't do it again. Because if we keep killing all these soldiers, who's going to stay? And also there's that danger. You've got to have a system of discipline that people will accept. Otherwise, everybody's going to mutiny or rebel. One of the first targets in a mutiny that occurs in AD 14 after the death of the Emperor Augustus, unpopular officers get lynched. One of them is this centurion whose nickname is Cado Alteram, which means bring me another, fetch me another, because his symbol of office was a vine cane or staff, and he's supposed to have sort of beaten soldiers on the back till it snapped and then bring me another one so I can keep doing it. So it's a bit like you had a tradition in the sort of Prussian and Russian armies, 19th century, where officers could physically hit men in the ranks, which again has not been the case in other traditions like the British tradition for a long time, because drawing the distinction between legitimate hit and trying to kill someone is obviously, so that's legally been thought of. The Romans don't seem to have had that problem. But on the other hand, you're risking as a centurion, if things go bad, that people might decide to get rid of you. So all of these things are a balancing act. But the discipline is strict, but it probably isn't significantly stricter than the discipline in a lot of armies, particularly in, say, the 19th, 18th centuries. So yes, there's flogging. Yes, there is capital punishment. But on the other hand, there's also a lot of leniency as well. Punishment in the Roman world is seen as something that's designed to be public, symbolic, to deter others. That's why you throw people to the lions in the arenas. That's why you crucify them so they die slowly and unpleasantly and very visibly. And the army works under the same principle. So things that will be most intimidating, but you don't overdo it because there's a risk that if they still keep saying no to what you're going on, well, what do you do?